Welcome to the show, everyone. Today we have Brendan, who is the CEO, and Wyatt, who is the CTO over at Constellation Labs. Guys, welcome.
Hey, nice to see you today.
Really happy to have you guys on the show. These DAG projects like this are so interesting, but I don't want to spoil the surprise. Can you guys give us the elevator pitch real quick? What are you doing?
Yeah, I'll quickly give sort of some of the business background and why I can jump into some of the technical. So we're building a horizontally scalable DAG architecture from sort of the ground up. So using first principles approach to start from a very kind of clean code base to create basically a mesh net of interconnected devices where each device on the network contributes bandwidth and resources to increase the overall speed of the network. And then layer on top of that an application layer, which you can think of somewhat, but not exactly like Ethereum's ambition with smart contracts, but as a microservices application layer and sort of distributed computing layer on top that people can leverage almost as a two-sided marketplace. So you have nodes providing validation and the underlying architecture with computation on top, and you can sort of donate resources to that and provide some kind of computation. Very similar to like SETI at home used to be. You'd crunch chunks of data and get satisfaction for that, but we're using economic incentives and two-sided marketplace to provide that. Well, I can talk about the technology.
I mean, honestly, I really like that. I mean, it's
You already nailed it, Brendan.
how can you compete with that? I mean, at TLDR, we just built a crypto that could actually work within consumer-grade applications. And we did that by finding a way to integrate with all of the existing backends that make up those applications you use on a daily basis.
Nice. Now, talk about the computational power and stuff. I can see a lot of, Iota application for this. So let's say I've got a smart toaster. Is that going to have, I don't know, the requisite computational power to do anything with the network?
Probably not in this case. I think, our vision goes back to what I was saying with, interconnected mesh network device. And I'll let Wyatt talk more about like unused compute power, but this notion that we have in any room a bunch of devices that aren't connected, and we want to be able to make those available to a network where some of those resources can be used rather than wasted. But no, a toaster may not kind of come into that, whereas a small device such as a laptop or a smart TV could potentially have the processing power.
I would.
Excuse me.
I would like to say maybe. I mean, I don't really know what the future holds for toaster technology, but honestly, what you want to provide to the network is configurable. So if we do get there and you have some wasted clock cycles on your toaster, man, please add some.
The future's bright for toasters, guys. Now, why did you guys decide to make a DAG and not a blockchain? What makes a DAG better in your mind?
Oh man.
Here we go.
Yeah, so I'll give you a tiny snippet of sort of what took us on the road to a DAG from where we started, and then Wyatt, who's like the visionary in terms of this, and certainly when I met him, knowing his background, could see that between my vision for like creating scalable systems and his with the actual underlying architecture, that the graph was the way forward, the only way to really solve what we were trying to do. And we were building a DApp at the time, and we found that there are huge limitations in building it. And as Wyatt started like really digging into the code, came across numerous problems and realized the solution was, I don't know, already kind of taken care of, I guess, in consumer-grade distributed systems.
It's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
I mean, I honestly think it is really just in the big data space. A long story short, like why are we running into these issues with scalability? It's because we built something using the same principles we were using like 10, 15 years ago, and learned a lot since then in industry. Yeah, I mean, literally when Bitcoin came out, everybody was running into issues with something called a monolithic architecture, which about 10 years ago, a bunch of major companies like Twitter, Google, Facebook, all those big names you've heard of, really spent a bunch of money and time researching how they could fix their infrastructure problems, and came up with this like microservices or serverless architecture. So in that same regard, we were like, what's the big issue with Ethereum? Why on earth would our simple application at the time, why was it running into these issues? Why was there no way to really even create an economic incentive for this application? Well, it's because you can't necessarily, the whole thing is really why were we all relying upon Ethereum? Why don't we just invert this reliance into a way of communicating across parallel, processes or parallel chains? And that's what we've done, and that's sort of how we have approached this problem. We managed to get that notion of smart contracts, or rather applications on the blockchain to work with a DAG.
I think that's really interesting. Like, we use the word now internally as applications. Like, we're creating an application marketplace that will have developers building applications on Constellation. And for us, this notion of creating distributed applications is somewhat misguided, because we want to create an environment which is familiar to conventional people, because that leads to mass adoption. And when you look at the architecture of Ethereum, where everything's executed on serial across all of the nodes, and we get something like CryptoKitties or the status ICO, either you slow down the network in the case of CryptoKitties, or you pay $6,000 gas to get to the front of the queue. and it's simply not really, you want to have a system where when everybody comes onto the network, they're bringing something that provides value. And instead of it slowing it down and clogging it up. And that's this notion of being horizontally scalable and allowing aggregate resources to be rewarded using economic incentives. And that can be really powerful. And creating this application layer means that you can effectively pull that code or that library that we're developing in sort of Java, JVM, sort of natively into applications. There's 9 million Java developers globally. There may be 9,000 good Solidity developers. Do you want to retrain the world, or do you want to create a product that is compatible with what we already use? No, but distributed, more secure, more freely available, and more democratic.
Yeah, absolutely. Going where the people already are, meeting them, I think is very different than saying, hey, you got to come over here and meet us in order to use this technology. And it's worked for Ethereum, and I think it's kind of given them some kind of a strange edge in their exclusivity, but I think it really hasn't invited as many people in to build on it as could be building on it. Now, I want to address scalability. So how scalable are we talking here? Everyone always likes to focus on the transactions per second. It's a metric that a lot of people like to focus on. So how scalable are you guys?
Yeah, I mean, TLDR is our throughput rate is a function of the number of nodes. It's variable based upon network delays, but basically variable by network delays. The second that you propagate a transaction within the network, it virtually instantly validates from the perspective of the user, and from especially the person you're trying to send a few bucks to. We managed to get away with this because we don't need to perform consensus in every transaction. That's really just the underlying principle of proof of mean. Similar DAG technologies as well do this, but yeah, I mean, we're really down to the point where like what's actually affecting your transaction rate is just whether or not there's an issue with your power lines or.
Yeah, and we like to use, we use quite boldly the term unbounded, and really what that means is that we have an expectation that as more nodes are attracted, any blockchain like this is a two-sided marketplace, and really boiling it down to that simple fundamental principle is important. You have nodes that are providing a service, which is validation and bandwidth, and then you have a computation layer, which is sort of going above and beyond that basic functionality to give a little bit more, where you can actually start executing things and running more complex operations rather than just validating data. And you need to have that underlying infrastructure of compute power. So we have an incentivization layer in the network to build that up. And even you as a person coming to leverage, let's just say, monetary transactions, you're then securing that underlying transaction layer. Another node can come to the network and provide compute. Let's have a GPU node connected to Constellation. I can collaborate with another 20 GPUs to provide like deep learning or AI processing or 3D rendering pipeline. And that's a two-sided marketplace. There has to be like an enterprise waiting and available to use that, and you need to have nodes that are incentivized to provide some kind of availability to the network. So we're focused on building that underlying core transaction layer, and then having partners come in and work with us to bring that higher tier of people donating compute power and getting rewarded for that. So we see it as a function of the more nodes that come to the network as our scaling characteristic, and it's sort of sublinear based on our kind of clustering profile, and it's pretty exciting. Like you can pontificate about transactions per second and things like that, but there's various things like latency, bandwidth, and a lot of variables that affects it.
Yeah.
and it's simply about creating an efficient network.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I said, I think a lot of people, they look at it in quite simplistic terms of who's got the
Yeah.
bigger number, and it's not necessarily the case of that, and there's a lot of factors that actually come into play here. Now, Constellation, no transaction fees. That's pretty cool, but how do you prevent spam attacks?
It's a great question. So it's sort of piggybacking off of what Brendan mentioned before. We do have this notion of, obviously like reputation. Well, Brendan mentioned that. But basically, we have this validator reward system that's based upon your ability to provide some type of in-memory computing power to the network. We've tied that in with our validation system and also our reputation system. So number one, after you validate a certain number of transactions, in the same sense that you would get paid transaction fees if you're a Bitcoin miner, if you're a Constellation miner, you'll earn this notion of spendable like reputation points or something. In essence, the actual data structure itself is pretty complicated. I'm going to keep that to a different talk. But the bottom line is this different score that's constantly increasing your value can be transferred into like throughput. So basically nodes who, per se, let's say that I am running a node and I'm at like Facebook and we're running into a bunch of issues. We want to, scale up with like 1,000, servers from fleet of whatever for some service. And each one of those services requires a Constellation node in order to, get enough throughput through enough transactions validated or something for some application that's there. What they could do in real time is through some marketplace purchase the throughput necessary in order to continue sending these transactions through the network. If the amount of compute they're able to provide at that current moment isn't really enough for the network to just automatically allow them to give that much. So bottom line is we rate limit. On your phone, if you want to send $5 to somebody, you can totally do that. 10 to 100 transactions per hour. But the second you're doing something like ridiculous, we basically just start to ban you. And that gets propagated through the network. Same thing with other things like double spends. And there's certain situations where performing, consensus or something like, obviously nodes act in Byzantine just because they're faulting with network delays. But for certain things, we're basically just have like a certain hey, if we just kick you off policy.
Yeah, and I think just reflecting on what Wyatt's saying here, again, sort of taking this bifurcation of our underlying transaction layer, nodes are going to be double signing transactions all the time. And if you want to actually broadcast transactions, send money, you've got to double sign other transactions on the network. And that is like similar to IOTA that you mentioned kind of earlier on. And that is a different layer to the fact that you have a compute layer above it, which is also an economic layer. So you have these two economic zones. The bottom one for 10 years is incentivized by these sort of reputation rewards, and the top layer is incentivized by a two-sided marketplace. Like it is nodes providing a service that are going to get rewarded by a vendor that's using them, and differentiating that layer like that allows the transaction layer to complete its processes freely, and then you have this economic layer on top which underpins greater services.
Right. In the same sense, we just commoditize usage of the network or some utility we're providing. Like in Bitcoin, it's like I don't really know, like whatever it is, I'm gonna pay you $5 in order to perform that service. We just do that for people who know that they need a high throughput transaction type blockchain service.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now you guys are bringing smart contracts to the DAG. What has been the challenge in making this happen? What exactly do your smart contracts look like? Is it going to be basically what we would envisage a smart contract to look like on Ethereum, or is it going to be something a little bit different? And how has this process been going for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, we tried to tackle this in the beginning, and we're sort of like, how is this thing? And how are we really going to get around the limitations of trying to have a certain set of bytecode executed in serial across your machines? Because the way that we have smart contracts working right now, they're pretty inflexible to certain sharding patterns. I mean things like Silicon stuff that's out there have managed to get certain use cases down, but for the most part, we're really caught up in a situation where the notion of putting code on a blockchain and requiring that blockchain to act as some universal computer, I gotta say, from a technical standpoint, is fundamentally flawed, because the whole reason why you build a distributed system is to perform computations concurrently or in parallel. And literally the idea of a smart contract platform is like, why on earth did I not just pay a software as a service company to just do something for me? Quite frankly, it's like you're using the wrong tool for the job. It just doesn't make any sense. So what we thought was, and this is sort of where a lot of our stuff with reputation came in, how could we actually get this notion of some type of utility tied to an actual application itself. And we did was we basically just inverted that notion of putting something on chain rather referencing something across chains. And literally our approach to smart contracts is creating cross-chain liquidity for multiple different parent chain nodes, with each chain itself corresponding to a specific application, a specific concurrent actual set of servers, protocol, what have you, and just the notion of the ability to take value from that chain and like atomically swap that with our coin. That fundamentally like removes the issue we have with trying to operate or execute code in parallel, and also is a huge step forward, especially in terms of like the way in which we've implemented it, cross-chain liquidity. As far as we're aware of, even Polkadot or Cosmos, no one has come up with some framework, if you will, for a way to create cross-chain nodes without requiring someone to necessarily use their coin as a liquidity agent. So we're pretty excited that we're what we know as the first decentralized cross-chain protocol. So yes, in addition to being able to create a parachain with Constellation, just using our code base in general will allow you to create something called an osmotic chain, which will have your own Merkle tree and some notion of being able to send data back in one forward direction, but maybe not with the atomic swap layer. So we're really trying to create that internet of blockchains that it just exists. In any way, shape, or form it needs to. Trying to really just decentralize.
And I just want to pick up on some of the verbiage we use and have been using. You'll often see us use microservices in our kind of nomenclature. And the reason being is because we take this notion of composite applications, and the simplest way of kind of framing that with an existing sort of technical framework right now is the microservices architecture. And it may well be that we're not exactly doing that on a fundamental level, but it's on a distributed system. But it's this notion that applications are built up of composite parts. Those composite parts can be all mixed on one chain or indeed across chains.
Correct.
But what you end up is with this complex application that then has a skid layer on that we then all are familiar with and use. But those processes run in parallel as opposed to being synchronously executed or serially executed, like in the case of Ethereum.
Exactly. One great example for those out there if they want to find something like this would be to Google Micro OS, which is just like an operating system someone made out of microservices. And one other thing too is that when I mentioned about like us trying to be able to integrate with the existing backends that most consumer grade applications use, this is precisely what I mean. What actually makes up the thing you see in your browser, you type google.com, is 1,000 different servers all executing one thing. And if you really want that level of performance, you need to use the same technology, which is just a concurrent architecture. And that's exactly what we did.
Cool. Very, very cool, guys. The tech behind it's really interesting. What are the use cases, though? What do you see being built on top of this? Where do you see the actual utilizations of Constellation being? What's your vision for it?
Yeah, so I think that's a really great question. So fundamentally, I'm going to kind of outline part of our sort of go-to-market with this, because I think that helps underpin what we see as a vision, then also what we think might come out of the actual ecosystem we're trying to build. So in a few weeks, we'll be releasing our community and developer portal, which token holders will gain access to certain tiers and be able to participate as a community member, whether it be providing support that's incentivized, providing documentation, guides, videos, and on the developer level, working on sort of bits of code, ACIs, which we call application chain interfaces, these sort of microservice buckets, as it were, or blocks or Legos. But that is a kind of seeding ground for these people. And with us in core, building the core architecture we discussed, we also want to make sure that we're providing a fertile ground for developers to come and contribute and build the notion of applications or apps. So where we have the Google Play Store as a mixture of fully fledged applications that are bundles of microservices, let's say. We're going to see an application marketplace of like building block ACIs, fully fledged applications, and they're going to be created by the community. And internally for us, we're very mission driven as a foundation structure. We want to do a couple of key things. One of our first projects we're working with in-house, and we are deploying in-house projects, not just like incubating like other chains, will be like a distributed energy marketplace. So being able to take technology that is carbon negative or carbon neutral, this is like carbon sequestration technology, and create a marketplace for some of those derivative products where they're otherwise not able to be produced, and transact that value sort of seamlessly. And you can go all the way from something like that, which for us is very mission driven and having impact, and actually deploying sort of real life kind of hardware on our network, which is what we're planning on doing over the next sort of 2, 3, 4 years, to something like a 3D rendering pipeline. Like you can see a place where there is a cluster of 200 GPU nodes. They're making their processing power available to the network, and we have a company that does rendering for restoration hardware. Like restoration hardware in the US takes them about 3 months to actually render their images for a catalog. It's incredibly costly and time intensive, and the kind of size GPU farms that are required for that are really not available. Like they're very commoditized and they're very scarce. Sorry, they're not commoditized and they're scarce. On our network, there would be like a way in which you could run these sort of rendering pipelines over these GPU nodes. With the move to sort of proof of stake on Ethereum, there's going to be a lot of this kind of compute power available, and it would work in the same way that something like proof of work works right now. So if you're in a mining pool, you're paid for like a number of shares in that mining pool to solve that block. This particular job will have a sort of price on it, or a bounty, or a rate, and each participant in that computation, in the same way that SETI at home takes bytes of data, spreads it out over many computers, reaggregates it, and then kind of provides some valuable information back to NASA. The same notion here applies. Take that job, break it up, run it over many machines, bring it back together, and compile it so that you've got some useful data, in this case, a 3D rendering pipeline. That could also be machine learning. We're moving into a world of AI, sort of augmented reality, predictive intelligence, all this kind of stuff. They require huge, scalable and elastic computing clusters. This is the ideal place for that kind of research to run over. Those big data sets can be run in like a redundant fashion over a large elastic network that's provided on a compute layer. And we're going to see, and we have internal people, and we're bringing partners in to build these apps to go out for our app marketplace, where they'll be open sourced or available, or maybe even paid for these applications with our native token, and people can leverage those services on top of Constellation.
Very, very cool. That's a lot of interesting use cases that I can see coming up around Constellation. Now, I want to move on to the next one. Iota, that's a thing. And I don't see this space as being a zero-sums game, but let's just assume for a second that there are 2 lions in a pit. One lion is the Constellation lion, the other lion is the Iota lion. What's going to make the Constellation lion come out on top?
So good question. Like, I think looking at the space at the moment, Iota has done a really good job of nailing the IoT market very, very squarely. And I think what we're looking at doing is nailing the actual application use case layer, where we would like to see existing applications leverage distributed technology and people with these devices. So, anyone that has a device anywhere can earn some kind of basic income or residual income from providing compute power to our network. That's a very different value prop to what Iota is doing. I think for us, philosophically, we're looking at creating an impact on the node level where people are providing those resources. We see that as a huge area for trickle-down economics into the right hands of people that have something like a phone or two. At the end of the day, there's 9 billion phones, between 7 and 9 billion phones on the planet, 5 billion connections, which means roughly we're almost at 2 phones per kind of connected person. Mm-hmm. When you look at that globally, if each of those phones is providing some kind of useful service to a network, such as validation, let's abstract compute power from this for a second. There's be some notion of economics going back into that layer. And for us, it's about execution. A lot of people say to me, is this company competition? Is this protocol competition? And we're all trying to do cool things in the space. We've all got innovative ideas, but what it comes down to is when rubber meets the road, and can we execute? And can we actually deploy applications that work? And that's really what's going to set people apart in terms of competition. It's less about the technology and more about, can you create an effective use case, and do people start using your network, and do you create a new economy? And that's what it comes down to, I think. So are they competition? They're solving a slightly different problem. I would say, do they have the team to execute? And I believe we do have the team to execute and bring this vision to reality, into life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the most important things. Doesn't matter how good your tech is, how good your idea is. If you can't execute, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Speaking of execution, we're going to see a test net coming in July, which is really cool. But what else can we expect from Constellation as the year moves forward? There's not a lot of details currently on the website as far as the roadmap. So can you let us in on some of the details? What can we see from you guys as 2018 moves forward, and when do you think we're going to see a mainnet?
Totally. So I'm going to start by just talking about the general dev roadmap, and I think Brennan, I'm going to pass off to you talking about it, Ryan.
Yeah, and the product side of stuff. Yeah, that sounds good.
Cool. So yeah, from our perspective, obviously we're really focused on just sort of getting everything out of general disarray and into a well-packaged little V1 release for everybody, just to get used to like our basic interface and like how this node is actually going to work. So right now we're focusing on just tying up some loose ends right now, and actually rewriting a bit of our architecture to line up with some of our math. We did just release a paper a couple days ago on some fundamentals that are necessary to really just sort of like prove how proof of mean works, and also describe how we actually define our reputation model. That final paper on reputation will be coming out later on with our mainnet, but right around our actual testnet release, we expect a paper on proof of mean. I'm working on that right now, and so yeah, that is one thing that will be coming out. And it's just going to be a general like model checking, and also sort of an explanation about how this new class of protocols actually work. It is fundamentally different than pretty much anything that's out there, except for maybe Skycoin. So yeah, it's pretty exciting. And in addition to that, so as we open up our actual code base and do whatever you want. And also, release a test net people can join too. We're going to basically clean up our gist and also like all of our GitHub issues. So people are going to be able to follow along and see sort of like how we're, maybe stepping towards our final mainnet release. We're basically going to be bifurcating into performance testing, which will also require a separate project we're working on. In addition to our main one, that's going to be something that plugs in with a lot of traditional big data tools in order for people to really just do some statistical load checking and just figuring out whether or not their blockchain in addition to ours actually works. So it should plug into at least one very major deployment service called Kubernetes, and will also be usable by some other data science tools in the Spark type ecosystem. So that's really what we got cooking for the rest of this year. Our goal is for doing mainnet next year in the early side of the year. In addition to just rolling this whole thing out, we're really focused on trying to develop some notion of like best principles in the space. I mean, especially in terms of like as a developer, we're really focused on trying to build some tools in addition to our actual code base that would allow people to, just have some metrics and some baselines to try and hit when they try to create their own protocol, both for creating parachains on our chain, but just to create your own blockchain in general. We're pretty excited to just try and roll out some tools for the community in general. These are things that will be language agnostic. Really just trying to help with that test R&D type life cycle.
Yeah, and I think what's really important to kind of pick up on there is, the development roadmap for towards the mainnet launch is be very iterative and very incremental. We're focused on providing frequent updates and pushes to code base with frequent releases. We think that's more important because it allows us time to iterate quickly and maintain high quality of code and iron out bugs and absorb feedback from the community. So to make this really efficient in our release cycle, we're releasing a portal, like I mentioned earlier, called Orion. That's going to be released in 2 weeks in V1. And again, that's going to have a similar release roadmap over the next 6 to 12 months. And we'll gradually, in parallel with the testnet development, become this application marketplace. of which we have core team members internally that are developing applications in-house, and we'll be financing those ourselves from a fund we're setting up. And then we'll have community developers, which we're going to be nurturing and pulling in. And if there are any developers that want to get involved in about a month and a half, 2 months' time, please reach out to us, because we're looking at building that community, and we're going to have grants available and various incentives. So when you think about ICOs on Constellation, the first phase is going to be applications that are going to be financed and funded, and those finances and funding can come from Constellation Foundation, and maybe from a notion of like groups of communities pooling together to create an application and looking to monetize that on our platform by use when it comes up to the mainnet. But my expectation is that quite a lot of these apps will end up being built on Ethereum. Like our actual Orion portal is going to start on an ERC20 token, and we will migrate that back end over to Constellation. And we feel like being a product-driven company right now, while we're still waiting for the core architecture to come on, means that when we roll out the mainnet, we will already have fully fledged applications that, despite having shortcomings, will be ready to port over immediately with an existing code base to Constellation. So we're going to have a concurrent, if you notice, we've got concurrency in our architecture, and we have a lot of concurrency in the way we work. We like to parallel develop a lot of things, and that's both internally and externally with partners. So Orion portals will be released in 2 weeks. And when we do this airdrop over the next 6 months, we'll be airdropping actual memberships to that platform. So you'll stake tokens, you'll gain access to 2 tiers, either community or developer, and those airdrop tokens are actually a 6-month locked membership, after which you can choose to participate. If you don't contribute, you then are able to transfer your tokens after that 6 months. But the idea there is for us to strongly build the community. And it's not just about core development, it's about us creating a robust and distributed community that is both developer driven, academically driven, and is sort of the starting point of a decentralized governance system for the actual protocol at a foundation level, right?
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Now, I want to expand on the airdrop idea a little bit, because so you guys aren't going to be doing an ICO, correct?
That's correct.
So we're going to be doing an airdrop. What percentage of the tokens are actually being dropped out to the airdrop?
Good question. So we'll be airdropping 2% of the total tokens. That's initially going to run for 6 months, and then we'll be extending at the end. We may adjust the amount of tokens, but notionally we've got 30 million tokens earmarked, first of all. If you own 1,000 tokens, you'll be eligible for the developer tier of our portal, which will, once you're in the portal, actions are incentivized, so you get to earn more by providing valuable resources, by developing code, by creating guides and documentation. As a community member, that's 250 tokens, which you stake. And that gains, you become maybe like a community supporter. So you think about your evangelists in Telegram right now. We have a forum that's completely gamified. The more you interact and the more positive like karma or like points you build up, earns you more rewards. So we're really focused on creating this self-sustaining network. And when Wyatt starts to talk more over the coming months about the consensus architecture and the way in which the network load balances, it's kind of inherently smart and self-governing. We're taking that same approach to the way of building our community, is truly trying to get back to the core of decentralization, and us working with the community and sort of empowering them to build with us. And that's what the airdrop serves for. It's going to give people the chance to stake some value into the network and yield some value, earn rewards back from helping us build, and become part of a participating community. And that's really cool for us.
Very cool. What about the other 98% of the tokens? Where have those been allocated out? How much has gone to investors? How much is the Constellation Foundation keeping? How much is going to the team?
Yeah, so we've actually just completed an internal audit of all this leading up to our TGE. And I have a document that's going through our design team over the next 2 days, and we'll be releasing this towards the end of the week in black and white. So we'll be making that available publicly to the community, and those percentages that are held back in treasury or locked up and have been sold will be disclosed. So I won't get into the numbers now, but expect that to be pushed out through all of our channels, whether it by email, social, and definitely in Telegram. That will be made publicly available for everyone to see, and that's been audited by our legal team, by a couple of companies in San Francisco that do assessments on this, and our CPAs we work very closely with. So we're doing appropriate due diligence before we release that.
Okay, awesome. What made you want to do an airdrop and I guess do private fundraising versus doing a public ICO?
Yeah, again, really good question, because I think what comes up most often in these situations is that we want to enable as broad a segment of the community to access the network, right, as it goes live. And distribution is really important for that involvement. For us, harnessing really good partners and people that are available in the space to not just be investors or token purchasers, as it were, but to add value was really important for us. So when we ran our private sale, it was done to fully accredited investors in a compliant way. So we very carefully chose compliance to ensure the longevity of our network, rather than kind of going about it in slightly more carefree manner. We unfortunately, took the decision probably about a month ago to not do a public sale, and instead, what's the real value of distributing tokens? You want the tokens to get into the hands of people that are going to use the network and provide value and build a community around it. So we could have just done a broad airdrop, right, and just scattered them wherever we wanted to, but we decided to take a very unique approach that we haven't seen yet, which was to provide this membership sort of to the portal as the airdrop. And what that will allow us to do is get it in the hands of the right people, measure and reward those that are contributing and being active, and adding more value to the network. Because over time, that's what we're after. We're after this core group of evangelists, and something that makes it, the sum is greater than all of its parts, right? Like, we're a core team. We can keep growing to 250 people all we want. But if we can build that beyond ourselves by doing this kind of distribution and doing it over a long period of time to enable more people to participate and get broader involvement and refine, like, are we getting PhDs in that are then going to help us peer review papers and they're going to get rewarded for that? Are we getting really outstanding developers to build ACIs and applications and they're going to get rewarded from our developer fund, which we're going to be deploying? Are we creating grants for these academics because they're going to work on a specific paper for us? That right there is a far more compelling reason to distribute tokens and do it thoughtfully. And to be really compliant, we took the decision to do it this way, which hopefully will be perceived in the right light in the community. I certainly hope so. A lot of thoughts gone into it.
Yeah, compliance is tricky without a doubt, and I certainly understand the desire to want to make sure you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's, so to speak. Very, very interesting. Now, for anybody who wants to get signed up for the airdrop, I'll put a link in down below. Make sure you follow the guys along on Telegram and Twitter as well if you want to see the follow-up, for example, to the exact token metrics that's coming out in a few days. So follow the guys over on Twitter and you can get some more details about that. Brendan, Wyatt, this has been a very interesting chat. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to sit down and go over all this with us.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you
for having us.
Thank you, guys.